All right, hope everybody's enjoyed lunch and enjoyed obviously the food served. It looked great. Thank you very much for joining me today. Appreciate the session after lunch can be wonderful. We'll try and warm up the room a little bit as well. My name is James Alliband, Director of Product Marketing at Tessian. Today I'm going to take you through navigating dark corners of social engineering attacks. We'll break the session today into three parts. So first and foremost, let's take a deep dive into social engineering attacks, the world that we live in today, the advanced nature of some of these attacks as well, and of course some of the organisations that have had to deal with them. Secondly then, we'll talk through behavioural intelligence modelling, what that concept is, and ultimately what that looks like in today's real world and what that may look like in some of your organisations. And then finally, I'll leave you with a few best practices and something to take away from the session. So I hope that sounds great. And with no further ado, let's dive in. So first and foremost, let's have a look at these logos on screen. So they all have something in common. And of course, they're all on a large list of organisations over the last couple of years which have been impacted by advanced social engineering attacks. When you think about some of the budgets that someone like Google or Ford may have when it comes to their cybersecurity budget, it becomes pretty scary when you think that they were victims of attacks which cost over in excess of $100 million. When you think about that and put that together, a staggering 90% of actual cyber attacks today involve some kind of social engineering, some aspect that has been engineered by bad actors. And then of ransomware attacks alone, 40% of ransomware attacks, and we think about like 5 or 6 years ago, really the ransomware age where NotPetya and WannaCry happened, but of course attacks are still happening today. They've almost become a little bit normalised in that perspective. But 40% of those style of attacks also involve some kind of social engineering. So of course, of the new age that we live in today, social engineering really becomes a modern attack type and a modern vector to try to, of course, engineer a way into an organisation. But we're kind of doing some of the damage ourselves as well. Because when you think about our digital footprint, it becomes a hacker's toolkit. It becomes their toolkit to be able to engineer their way in. We think now that 3 in 8 of people, and I'll kind of throw this one out on Facebook, but I'm sure it's declining ever so slightly, but 3 in 8 people do have a Facebook account today. 1 in 8 have an Instagram account, and 1 in 10 have a LinkedIn account, you know. And I'm sure everyone in this room has possibly in the industry that we're in have got at least a LinkedIn account here. We put information on there, whether it's we're attending the event today or we've got a new promotional piece of media out to our marketing teams, whatever that may be. We'll put a lot of information on social media, and sometimes it comes through almost without filter to a certain extent. And really what we're doing there is ensuring that we're making it easy for them. We're making bad actors' lives easy with the information that we pass online and the information that we deploy to them. But with all of that information, and of course different organisations around the world, you know, the information that we put in, really it's scary to think of what the bad actors can actually do with it. You know, ultimately they're able to utilise this information, utilise data science, data harvesting, and run at compute speed. They run at speed faster than you and I would ever want to or need to run. They use all that information to be able to gather information quickly, find their targets, find their prey, and then of course expose organisations. And of course we've seen that in many, many times. And of course they can then create highly targeted spear phishing attacks because they're using the information they piece together to create a really personable attack, to create an attack which has the ability to really trick the victim into understanding, okay, this is someone I've seen before, it may be an account that's taken over or supply chain compromise, something which ultimately makes it feel quite warm to the person who's the victim. And when the warmer it feels, the more likely that the attack could take place. And when you think about that from that point of view as well, it's fairly easy to get there. Let's look at this example, for example, of a social engineered attack. So this example, bringing this to life and information that was scoured off Newswires, and this is a real attack that did happen back in 21. Bad actors were able to leverage machine learning and data harvesting to gather enough information to really piece apart a potential acquisition. So what happened here is through LinkedIn, they were able to find and identify the CTO, Andrew Neil, CFO, Andrew Neil of SoBank. And in this attack, they were able to see that not only was Andrew then also communicating through a venture together with a VC, and the senior partner, Greg Neal, who is up there at the top, as you can see. They were communicating an email. They were having conversations about this acquisition, and having conversations about how they was going to go to market together. And what happened also is then Andrew Neil put on LinkedIn and said that he was speaking at a financial event in Chicago back in 21. So he also exposed a piece of information there that gave the bad actors the ability to see when he may be more vulnerable because he was at an event. So from that point of view, when he actually went to the event, Andrew Neil was then exposed on LinkedIn. He was able to see that they was out, and what the bad actors did is they hit his email account with a series of emails, and the emails led them to 2 pieces of critical information. At one point, they recognised internally, it gets called Andy. So first and foremost, he put in his signature, Andy, really nice piece of personal information, not necessarily what you can see on LinkedIn. And secondly, they found out who his partner was as well, who the person that they needed to contact at that moment in time. On that point of view, then when they got that information on the morning, in the afternoon, they sent over a wire request over to his, from the out of office to his partner, to the person, the head of accounts that they needed to contact, and then they were able to see and able to ask that person to make that wire transfer. And this actually happened, and this happened really easily. Very simple pieces of information I was able to piece together to be able to get to the point where somebody was vulnerable, acted on Andrew's behalf, a lot of urgency involved in the series of emails, flooded the head of accounts, and really managed to get, and then the wire transfer happened. Now, it sounds really easy and it sounds almost unbelievable. Like, really, James, did that really happen? Well, actually, Google and Facebook, these are 2 very similar style attacks that happened in this exact way as well. So it's not just this attack, but also, of course, bigger attacks that have cost organisations in excess of 100 millions. So I think really what we can say is, first and foremost, we've shifted a lot to the cloud over the last few years. We've moved on to 365, moved on to Google Workspace, and we still use email as still the primary channel for communicating externally. And we think about that, we haven't really changed our behaviours, we haven't really changed what we do or how we communicate with each other. You probably got an invite to this event through email, you may have communicated with the event on email. We still communicate with each other on email. Whether we do that internally or not is a different matter, but certainly externally, we still communicate on email. But the trust on email has become really at an all-time low. But how do we get here? We got here through simple reasons. You know, recently I've been asked a lot, like, why have we seen such a rise in phishing attacks? Why have we seen such a rise in this attack vector? Well, the reality is it works. And when something works for bad actors, and there's no real reason to change, these are tried and tested methods from bad actors that continue to work month on month, year on year. And if, as I said, if there's no reason to change, why change? Because organisations are still getting exposed through their channels of communication, certainly through email. You know, email is the last open communication channel. It can reach anyone in an organisation. And as I said earlier, social engineering gives us the ability to make it really personal. How often do we get caught out by an email that tone has come across a bit different, and we sit there and go, who's this person talking to me like that? Or who's this person kind of saying that? And reality is there's no intention for that at all. It's plain text. So from that point of view, email is a really easy way to manipulate and expose through different tones, different urgencies, to ensure that people really react to that. Because again, it's the last standard at open communication. And the global pandemic has made us more reliant than ever with email. Now we're working from home, we're working remotely, we're working around the clock, we work in different hours. Organisations are spread across different time zones. We communicate a lot on email. And as a result, business email compromise now, or BEC, may have heard it been called as an acronym, but business email compromise is now the number 1 cybercrime with 1.8 billion in global financial losses throughout 2021, and no doubt that'll go up in 2022 as well as the statistics come out. 91% of cyber attacks, as I mentioned earlier, begin with a spear phishing email, begin with a personalised phishing email which has been targeted to somebody, 90%. And according to the IBM's cost of a data breach, the average cost of a data breach globally is at 4.2 million. Now, I appreciate that's different numbers depending on the size of organisation, etc. But ultimately, that average weighs out at a high cost and a high impact through the channel of communication through email. So how are hackers bypassing legacy email security solutions, which I think is, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest challenge that we have is we haven't changed the way we communicate. We still communicate in email, but we're still securing these new environments with legacy technology. You know, ultimately, legacy solutions, whether it may be a secure email gateway or it may be built-in controls into that environment, are not able to stop today's attacks. They're not made for the landscape that we live in today. They're not made for the attack landscape and the attack vectors that we see within our environments. And of course as well, legacy rule-based approach or threat intelligence approach is really only good as the last attack or the rules that have been set and maintained. And we all know, of course, how rule bases can become legacy and old and outdated over a period of time. There are a lot to continue to update. When you think about that and think about legacy solutions and their purpose in place, it's fairly easy when you think about the basic authentication checks that organisation will have to go through to ensure that they can then get bypassed through an organisation. So it's really time for a new approach, time to really leverage the power that we have with technology today, with behavioural intelligence, to detect these new threats, but become more reliant on behavioural intelligence to be able to stop these style of attacks. You know, understanding and moving from that static approach to behavioural intelligence modelling really is the new vector that we need to look at, the new way that we need to look to be able to see and detect from normal behaviour to more advanced behaviours and really being able to understand and identify these new style of attacks. You know, when you look at how Tessian works, for example, there's 3 areas that we really look through, and we ensure that we go through these checks every single time in an email. You know, first and foremost, we'll use historical data, and that historical data is really a linchpin to any organisation. How do I communicate with other people across my organisation? How do the other people communicate? How do we communicate with each other first and foremost? What kind of how do we share financial information? How do we share different kinds of information? These all important pieces of information that can be the difference at times. So first and foremost, behavioural intelligence modelling, put that historical data and quantify human risk, quantify risk to the organisation on first and foremost what the employee has access to, but secondly how they interact, what kind of files they send. Being able to piece that all together gives your security teams nuggets of information that they may, of course, not had before, but then, of course, secondly to that as well, ensuring that they can then set the rules and set a scope around those people to ensure they can protect their interactions on email. And then finally as well, of course, recommend those actions. Then moving on to the automated threat prevention, ensuring that they can detect and prevent advanced email security and data loss as well. We truly believe at Tessian that email should be a bi-directional approach. You shouldn't just be looking at the threats coming in, but also the risk from the insiders as well. Whether that be accidental insiders, people making mistakes on email, or malicious insiders, people looking to steal IPs, looking to steal data. All of that most commonly can be sent on an email as well. So it's ensuring that, making sure that using that solution in the middle is not just looking at the threats coming in, but also the data going out as well, which of course is truly can be a differentiator when you think about how you can actually reduce the risk to your organisation on email. And then of course finally as well, in the moment security coaching. We have the ability to also notify employees with contextual warning banners as well. And what this means is what we're doing is we're actually telling that end user why that email is a phishing email, giving them the pointers out, showing them in the email within the body, and being able to show them exactly what the identification points and what the threat signals have been. This is such a different approach to the old security awareness training, yearly slideshows that you go through for 45 minutes. And then, of course, a year later, we're refreshing it. Really, reality is it's a compliance check. But today, we've got the ability to actually teach people in the moment about what a phishing attack looks like, why that email was malicious, and we're using real examples every time, not just phishing simulations. And then on the flip side as well, the data. Somebody's sending a file out and they've accidentally used the autocomplete and sent it to the wrong person. How about if there's a different approach? How about if the approach is that we show them, we flag that email to them and show them, hey, this email shouldn't have gone to Jane Smith at Tessian.com. It should have gone to Jane Smith at sobank.com, for example. You've just used an autocomplete. It's such a simple mistake that can have such high financial consequences. And yet, if making sure that technology is in the middle and understanding that that email, which had SoBank financial records in that email, we're getting into the nitty-gritty, but the point is having that, being able to contextually see that can just be the difference at time. And then, of course, educate those end users as well. So, as I mentioned earlier, let's take a look at some real-life examples, some real-world social examples of why and what happened when we took a look at the examples through our machine learning algorithms as well. So, first and foremost, this is a great example of a phishing email that's come in. And as you can see, there's a few red flags in this email straight away. First and foremost, the display name. You can see that it's got Michael HR Notice, but then John David in the domain. I'd expect some people would be able to see that, but of course some wouldn't, and depending on what they're doing for their day as well. The suspicious link in the email, it's a bit of a weird link. You can see it doesn't really look like a Microsoft share link, but again, it's in the body, and there's a ton of urgency in there as well. As you can see, 20% of the employees have acknowledged the handbook, and we're looking to get to 100% by Friday. Really simple, contextual. It doesn't feel like there's any harm to this email, but the reality is there's a ton of harm. First and foremost, as we mentioned earlier, the display name is incorrect, and the urgency in the email was a really good threat signal for us to be able to identify that there was urgency. Why would there need to be urgency in that email? But the most important thing was the suspicious link as well. Suspicious link was a malicious link to a file to download, which was a piece of ransomware on this particular example. Of course, they were targeting new employees to download the employee handbook. So you can see very simply and easily an email which doesn't look malicious in nature can be hidden behind plain text very simply and very easily. But just being able to report that, being able to see that and mark that, as I mentioned earlier, educate people in the moment. There's a real advantage there to be able to really educate people in that particular moment so they can see that attack type, they can see what's seen, and they can see why that email, which as I said is in plain text, is actually a malicious email in place. Taking a look at another example, you can see a Microsoft Teams link here. The sender's email address, again, flagged out, and you can see that there's new activity in Teams coming from Jessica in this example, but of course also sent to, so there's a little bit of an anomaly there. Suspicious link, and we can also see the formatting just looks off as well. It just doesn't look like Microsoft Teams, and some of us again will identify that, but not everybody. When we ran it through, again, we could see the sender's email address, but the most important thing here is we saw, and we clicked in the link, and we was able to see the path of the URL at this point as well. Just being able to see that URL, see where that URL is going to, and seeing, of course, stripping that URL back, then you can start to see that actually the link wasn't correct. And we could also see as well that the domain acme.com does not usually send emails from this server as well. So we saw there was a server. The email server that it was sent from wasn't the usual server that it was sent to as well. So again, really small piece of information that are pieced together to enhance the profile of this particular email. With this particular example, you can see again, sender's email address. You've seen a pattern here with email addresses, which we were able to see. And what happened here as well, you can see that the display name lookalike, suspicious links in here as well, and formatting. So when we ran it through the algorithms, we could see straight away that display name was ACME United States, which is similar, and a domain belonging to the company that we use internally at Tessian ACME for any testing. And you could see that we could see there was an account takeover impersonation attack here. Somebody was trying to impersonate the ACME domain. And of course, a suspicious link as well. Trying to get that feeling of warmth. Oh, it's just somebody internally sending me a link to click on. Don't really need to look at it. But the reality is, again, malicious file in place and a malicious payload that was built within the email as well. And then finally, you can see here as well that the attacker had simply invented a person in this example. So we just invented a person that's been impersonated. So the legacy tool in this example wouldn't be able to match an invented person because they would have no prior history, no historical data. The suspicious link in this email as well. And of course, the social engineering aspect, the urgency in this email. I need to debit the fees of your payroll within the next 2 hours, so people feel like they need to react pretty quickly to that. How we saw it, as I mentioned earlier, in using that historical data, which is pretty critical in these types of attacks, we could see that we'd never seen this person before. No one had communicated with this person before. So quickly identified there was something suspicious. This person is new. Never spoke to this person before. And as I mentioned earlier, this was a new made-up account. The person didn't exist, completely impersonated. The link was a malicious payload. So within the email, you can see that, and he's making that pretty, generic in the sense of, good afternoon, Joel, I'm a newbie here. I attempted to call you twice a day. So he's also saying that he's attempted to call the person. Just really adding that warmth to the email, making sure that they feel relaxed about what they're doing. And as I mentioned earlier as well, the email contained a shortened link within that email, and we're really giving that information out and showing the end user straight away how they can see the next stage of that and how they can see the information, just to make them feel like they're actually being protected in that moment instead of being exposed. The last example I'll focus on today is a vendor account takeover example. So as you can see here, there's a suspicious link in the email address as well. The email address was actually a legitimate address in this example, so a typical supply chain compromise attack where they was impersonating somebody from an external party attempting to deliver malware. So what's typically happened in these examples is there's a bad actor on the other end of that account, or somebody's exposed credentials, and they're trying to get into a third party, they're trying to get in through the supply chain. Because the email address is legitimate and the display name was legitimate, of course there's historical data here. So what we're looking for now is, well, how can we look further? Because everything I've told you before was around display names we haven't seen and display names that we don't know anything about. So you're thinking, okay, well, there's no historical data. Well, there's historical data here because this person has been communicating with Penny throughout multitudes of different emails. So what we're looking for now is really different pieces of information. We're looking first and foremost, we could see that there was the email was sent from the United States of America, a country that the email is not usually sent from. So from that point of view, we're saying straight away, well, why is William in the United States? There's a red flag straight away from that point of view. Secondly, the email contained a really unusual link, what looks like a malicious impersonation of a box link. So again, another red flag. And you start to piece this together and you look at it and break it down and go, well, of course it's a malicious email. And then, of course, the sender also sent a unusually high number of emails that day. And that's a really common attack pattern. So piecing those information together very quickly, you can start to see how you can strip that back, and all of a sudden you start to see these points and these trigger points within that email very quickly. So I think we can all agree it's really a new approach for email security. It's time for a new approach. We need to be able to shift away from a static behavioural approach to a behavioural approach. Empowering end users, I think sometimes we kind of throw the terminology around of the end users being the weakest link. But in reality, we can empower our end users and empower everyone in an organisation to actually become part of the solution. I think that's something that we really need to consider and really take away from today is end users can be part of our end result. They can be part of our security teams. They can help and empower our security teams by making better decisions when they're interacting with email. And we can certainly help them do that. And we can tailor coaching on real world attacks, as I mentioned earlier as well. We can really show those attacks through and really demonstrate to an end user why that phishing attack may be in that approach. So hopefully that was useful for you. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event as well. And thank you very much.